A lot of us are obsessed with trying to capture the majesty and beauty of rugged landscapes in map form. Canyons are not completely unique, but they're different enough that I thought they deserve some special attention. We spend a lot of time looking at mountains. So I'm going to talk about my work on this map over the last couple months. The San Rafael Swell, this map is of, is a popular destination for outdoor recreation in east central Utah. I suppose given its shape and its location, you could call it Utah's kidney, but nobody does. Don't call it that, we'll be offended. It is not part of a national park, but since 2019, it has been divided between several large designated wilderness areas, mostly around the rim, that are only open to horses and hikers, and then a large recreation area, mostly in the middle, that has trails for off-road vehicles and mountain bikes. It's the epitome of a public lands compromise area that only took 40 years to work out a compromise. In fact, I started this map because one of my sons did a bike packing trip, and for those of you not familiar, it's bike packing, that is a thing. I didn't know that. Across it this spring and asked me to make him a map, and how could any carto dad say no? The swell, as we commonly know it, was formed about 50 million years ago when the same forces that pushed up the Rocky Mountains pushed up a dome about 2 miles high, which has since been eroded away in the middle. By the way, this is my very first geologic profile. I'm very proud of it. It was a lot of fun. Only took me 30 years to make one, to get around to making one. The north and west side here is a much more gradual slope with lots of canyons like the one you see on the top there, cutting through it. And then on the south and east side, it's much more steep with, oh, the captions are, anyway, with something, a very steep ridge up to about 50 or 60 degrees tilted called the Reef, the San Rafael Reef, which is full of cliffs, narrow slot canyons, and large arches. If you've ever driven on I-70 across Utah, you would have passed, well, right through the captions here. Right through here, it cuts right through the canyon. This is, I think, one of the very last pre-NEPA freeways that was built, and it probably would never be built today. So the idea is, could I capture the stark majesty of this landscape in a map? This is not a new desire. I clearly remember back in 1979, first time I ever visited Zion National Park, and it's Zion, not Zion. I'll be offended if you call it that. Soon after we moved right nearby there, and pulling out, this is not the national park map of the day, but pulling out the national park map of the day, and trying to match it up to what I was seeing out the window, and realizing that the terrain on the map just didn't cut it. If only I had become a cartographer. Of course, others have worked on canyons. I sometimes find that a lot of my terrain cartography is trying to imitate what Tom does with my limited talent and tools. But this is not, as much as I love this map, I am taking a different approach to the same kind of landscape. The first step was to choose a basic shaded relief. When I map this area, I really prefer sky model shading, which is what you see here on the right. Similar to what Patrick developed several years ago. I really don't like what the traditional hill shading does. This one's kind of the multi-directional that you sometimes see around today, where they take 2 or 3 different directions and combine them together. And I just think sky model is the best because it has the, I just like the overall look of it, the kind of almost painted, airbrushed look of it. And the other thing is that slot canyons, like this is called the chute right here, come out really dark, which, as you can see, they are. So I really like how it emphasizes slot canyons. But what about the surrounding cliffs? Could I make the surrounding cliffs pop out a bit more that is so prevalent in this area? So I tried several techniques to try to emphasize the cliffs. None of these are earth-shattering. I'm sure many of you have used some of these kind of things in different ways, perhaps. before. Basically what I'm looking for is some way of doing edge detection, like literally edge detection. And so the first one here is just to use slope. And then, so here's a slope map, and then filtering out all but the steepest slopes. This next one, what I did is I took the slope and then subtracted that from like a regional mean of the slope, with the idea that what I'm looking for is areas that are flat and then have a steep slope and they're flat again, so that the steep slope is anomalous. So try to do that, and then the same thing. Once I combine that and then kind of blur it in, and you know, this problem with these kinds of talks is you always get to that last slide and you're like, I can't see it. And we love doing really subtle things that nobody notices. So I've got one of that really sticking out there on that third slide, and then blend it in. I like the slope one better on this. Here's a couple other options. The first one is to use a measurement commonly called the topographic prominence index. It's usually used to highlight mountain peaks. And what you do is you take the elevation and then you subtract it from a regional, a broad average of the elevation. I'm doing the opposite. I'm looking for places that are lower than the surrounding, that are kind of very suddenly lower than the surrounding area. And so that creates that with the cliffs. It turns out, strangely enough, that if you take that topographic prominence index and you compute it for several times with larger radii, and then you add it up, add those all together. So you do it with like 1 pixel, 2 pixel, 3 pixel radius all the way out. And then you add them all up. You get this really cheap, but actually pretty good approximation of ambient occlusion. I'll let Bernie do the math on that. But it actually works out pretty nicely. So that bottom one actually looks a lot like ambient occlusion. And so I can combine that. I don't like that one as much for this purpose. But if you've ever done this before, if you take ambient occlusion and do it as a soft light on a regular hillshade, it's pretty effective. It does a pretty nice job. So that's not what I'm doing, but. And a couple more layers, because we all like to composite, 50 or 60 layers together that no one's ever going to notice. Since the swell is a dome, it made sense to have an elevation mask here, and then to put that as luminosity, which would tend to kind of gray out the flats around the dome and then highlight the dome more. And then I have an air photo there, which was combined with linear light. It's really washed out on the projector, sorry. But it looks really washed out, and it's supposed to, because it's being composited with everything else. Since most of, but the linear light is really good at just adding some color to it without adding all the luminosity from the air photo. One of the advantages of that is because this is a desert with not a lot of vegetation, essentially what I'm adding there is geology. So all the yellows and oranges and reds of the underlying rock. So that produced this. So this is a finished product there. It's less washed out than on the screen. Which I was pretty happy with, and kind of originally planned on ending there. But then I kept throwing more stuff and more stuff and more stuff on it, and eventually it turned into something much more complicated, more of a general tourism map. So that's what this ended up at. And that process introduced a couple other issues. One was I wanted to have marker symbols for a lot of the destinations that are very popular for outdoor recreation in this area. But there's not a lot out there for the kind of specialized recreation that's very common in southern Utah. And so common libraries didn't really have any of these symbols, except that the one on the upper left is, I think, in a national forest symbol library. But the rest of them I had to make up. And I am not skilled at making at making marker symbols, inventing marker symbols. So, I don't know, can you tell what these are? Can anybody who's experienced in this area can tell what they are? Can you tell what the difference between these three are? This is a rock climbing area. This is a slot canyon. This is a technical slot canyon. So, again, notice the tiny helmet, you know, which you can really pick out down here. That guy's wearing a helmet. Anyway, yeah, the one here, the arch. You know, I've seen others. This is a trick. This is where icon design is a big deal, but a lot of people use Delicate Arch, which is kind of this iconic arch in Arches National Park. Except for the weird thing about that is that there's very, very few arches that actually look like that. That's an extremely rare kind of arch. And that one's much more common kind of arch. Except for somebody told me that looks like an island in a river, and now I can't unsee that. So, and now neither can you. So, we have rock art, which is supposed to look kind of like the bighorn sheep on rock art, and there is tons and tons of rock art in this area, and tons of bighorn sheep on rock art. All I've seen is pronghorn antelope down there. The one difficult one was this one. This is supposed to be a historical site, and well, there's a lot of cabins in this area, old miners' cabins and stuff. There's also other kinds of historical sites, like especially uranium mines. There's a lot of old uranium mines, and no, you're not going to glow if you go visit them. But I wanted something that was generically historical site, and I've had a hard time finding that. So I am more than happy if anybody has ideas on what I might use instead, and strategies I might use instead, because some of these, as a lot of overthought icons tend to do, don't work as well at these really small sizes that you see on the right there. So here is this link will take you to a draft of the map, and with giant draft written across it. But you're welcome to go look at that. I would really appreciate this. I don't consider this done yet, so I would love any feedback you might have. And if anybody wants these copies, you're welcome to them. So thank you.
So we do have a few minutes. We have perfect. We have time for a few questions. So if you put your hand up, I will bring the roving mic to you.
Just curious if you considered contours and what interval you'd be using based on, you got cliff bands and it's flattened out. How do you approach that?
Yeah, if I were making an actual hiking route map, I probably would consider it more. This map was more of just kind of getting. This is the kind of map you'd take if you just wanted to see where should I go. So it doesn't give the detailed instructions on how to get anywhere, and the actual trail. It shows trails, but it doesn't show them in enough detail. It's 1 to 85,000, so it's just not of the scale to where that really matters. And the problem with contours is anything interesting, the contours are unreadable because they're all next to each other. So, yeah, I hadn't really thought about doing contours for this.
Thank you.
Can you talk about road symbology and how you're tackling the access to get around this place? Because I think the relief is great, but one of the big challenges of visiting this area is getting to different places and the road quality and how it changes from season to season, and what kind of vehicle you need to get around. Have you put some thought into that?
Thanks, Martin. Have you been around the swell, Martin? You seem to know what the situation is.
I've been there once, and I have a rental car.
I was doing field work. It's a great thing about cartography in this area is the necessity of doing field work. And 3 times almost got my truck stuck in one weekend. So on a road that was like, wait a minute, this must be an ATV track, not a road. So I don't think I have time to talk about it, but I actually did trying to work up a road classification system that is, what can you get on this, what's the nicest vehicle you can get on this road? And it is very much a continuum. There are several places where you're just driving down a wash bottom for 20 miles, and people are calling it a major road, and I'm like, good luck. So yeah, it's that is I did deal with that on the map, and unfortunately, all the GIS data that I was using as the input was completely inadequate for that, and so I've had to do a lot of that by hand of reclassifying the roads. So. But that is one of the goals, is to try to help people figure out what they can take so that we get fewer people stuck. Because there is literally the only real paved road through this area is the freeway. And there's literally places where you can turn off the freeway onto a dirt road with no exit. So that is a concern.
Maybe we'll take one more while Tom gets set up. Oh, see, and I expected I'd need to move to the back.
I was just curious if you had any thoughts on symbolizing and representing water in desert environments, and how you communicate that like a water source might only be there a few days a year or things like that.
Yeah, if I were, so this area has 2 small rivers that go through it. That's the only real water, other than a few seeps and springs. If I was doing a larger one where it was actually a wayfinding map, I probably would have indicated more about springs and such. As it is, I basically on the map say there is no potable water anywhere on this map, so bring your own water. But
Wow. Okay.
yeah.